That is a great closing song for where we're jumping into today. Y'all nailed that. That's great. Not because y'all are awesome, but I'm just saying, thank you. That was great. Really quickly, before we jump in, last week we pitched this book out as a possibility for those that have just kind of said, man, I'm struggling with regularity in reading the Bible, and I need a plan. I need I need that. We pitched it and we said, hey, go to Amazon and order yourself one. But in the meantime, there were enough people that kind of talked out, reached out. I found a bulk supplier, and so we've got one bulk order sitting on the table back there. If they all go away, I'll reach out to the bulk supplier again. But just kind of a quick recap. This is a deal that you would read, if you read it every single day, you would read through the whole Bible in a given year. I know that scares some people to death. If you want to tackle that and read it like that, that's great. But if that scares you, start on the day, start at the beginning, and just read it. And put the date down that you start. And the next day that you read, cross the date out at the top, put that date down, and just read through. The Bible is not in here. It tells you what chapters to read. You'll read 2 to 5 chapters a day. And then there's commentary, devotional material attached to that. And then there's some additional reading that's suggested. Paul David Tripp, I wouldn't recommend him if I didn't trust what he writes. I spent the last half of December going through this just to make sure that we agreed with as much as we could in a two-week period. I like it. Here's the thing that I like the most about it. It helps you create regularity. Like, if you desire that, and we're seeing that in the surveys that are coming out, like people's biggest need that they're talking about in 2026, they're like, I need regular time in Scripture. This is an easy way to do that, okay? Grab one off the table. If they're gone after today, we will order more, and we'll have them here as quickly as possible. You start whenever you get it simple, okay? So there's that. Otherwise, all I got to say is we're starting Exodus today. We're kicking off Exodus. We're going to be here for as long as it takes. It's hard for me to sit down pastorally and plan out a calendar because sometimes we just don't know. Other things come up and we want the freedom to talk about that. So we're going to be in Exodus until we're done. So we're going to be in Exodus chapter 1 if you have your Bibles. And if you don't, it's going to be on the screen. If you need a Bible, take one off the table, make it yours, put your name in it, walk out with it, bring it back next week. And I would encourage you, today ends in a cliffhanger. You know, this is like the season finale of a Netflix special. You binge watched all 6 episodes in one sitting, and then you're like, I got to wait a whole year, maybe, if they don't cancel it, to see what happens next. Well, I can promise you, next week we will continue, so come back. We're more faithful than Netflix, so come back and enjoy that. If you were in one of our community groups last semester, you had the privilege of walking through the high story of Genesis, and so you don't need a catch-up, but here's the thing. I think a lot of people do, because if we just jumped into Exodus without giving you a little bit of backstory and a little bit of context, is the word that we use frequently, you're going to be like, I don't know why they're there. I don't know who they are. What are all these names? There's at least 12 of them, and I'm just really, really confused right now. So, in a nutshell, to catch us up through the book of Genesis, I'm not going to start with creation. I'm going to start with this guy named Abram, okay? Father, well, he gained a syllable by the time the song came, but in the beginning, he was just called Abram. God appeared to Abram and he said, Abram, go. Go to the place that I will tell you. I'm not even going to tell you how to get there. I'm not even going to give you a map. I'm just going to say travel until you're there. And as you go, take your wife, Sarah, take your whole family, take everything you own, and just become a sojourner to get to the land that I am going to give you. And so he left. And as he was going, and as this story unfolded, his story with God, so he became known as Abraham at the moment in which God entered into something called a covenant with him. A covenant. A lot of times in the Old Testament, you would actually read it as cut a covenant, or cut a covenant. And so they cut a covenant. They made a deal based upon the faithfulness of God, not the faithfulness of Abraham. And God told Abraham, he said, I am going to make from you a great, huge nation of people, and they will be a blessing to everybody. A blessing to everybody. And he said they're going to be like, at one point he said, like the stars in the sky. You're going to see them, they're going to be beautiful, not going to be able to count them. Another time he's like, it's going to be like sand on the seashore, innumerable, massive, and everyone will be blessed through you. And so Abraham and Sarah, they walked, they did their things, they had their life, they were getting up in age, and at one point Sarah's like, look, I'm old. You're older. There's no baby to make this happen yet, so we're gonna make it happen. So she sent her servant into Abraham, her husband, and they had Ishmael. Ishmael by the servant Hagar, and they were like, oh, here it is. And God was like, no, not him. I told you to wait, and you rushed it. Now, even in their disobedience, God said, but even though you rushed it, and this was not what I wanted, I'm still going to take care of them, okay? I'm still going to send them out. He's going to be protected. Nobody's going to touch him. Hagar too. Go to Galatians. Read about that. It's mind-boggling, but either way, that's what happened. And then another 30-some-odd years passed when Abraham hit 100 years old. Sarah was in her upper 90s. They had Isaac. Isaac, child of the promise. Isaac meaning laughter, because apparently when Sarah heard that she was going to have him, she laughed. But either way, they had Isaac. And you know, everything was great. Actually not. Everything sounded great. It felt great. And then, though, God decided, you know what, Abraham, you've been waiting on this Isaac for so long. I need you to walk to the mountain that I'm going to tell you where it is when you get there. And I need you to sacrifice Isaac. What? You told me you were going to bless me, you were going to multiply my people, you were going to make us more numerable than stars in the sky, the sands on the shore. All people will be blessed by me, but then, okay, I'm going to walk. And so he walks, does the thing. He takes with him his son, probably not a toddler at this point, probably old enough to know, old enough to carry wood. And they walk, they build an altar, and Isaac even asks, hey, Dad, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham said, God will provide. And in the middle of it, he's getting ready. He's being obedient. He's doing everything he's supposed to do. He raises his knife to slay his son because God had asked him to. And he said once again, okay. And a voice called out and said, Abraham. And Abraham said, Hineni, here I am, unfurled before you, spread out. He said, spare your son. Don't kill your son. And he turned and he looked, and there was a ram caught in the thicket. So he sacrificed that there to him. And then Isaac grew up. And Isaac had another son. And there were daughters involved, and there were other siblings involved, but we're carrying home the story. Abraham to Isaac, then Isaac had Jacob. Jacob. And so Jacob, the funny thing about Jacob, he had a lot of kids, but Jacob, before that, he actually wrestled with God. Not like laying in your bed at night with thoughts going through your head like, God and I were wrestling with this. No, like he wrestled, Greco-Roman, before Greco-Roman. Like, grabbed hold, tussled, wrestled. WCW, if you're old enough. Maybe NWA. But either way, they wrestled. And at one point, it said God touched his hip, and then he walked with a limp the rest of his life. But either way, Jacob wrestled with God. Jacob, after that, would become known as Israel. Things starting to make sense now, start to take shape. God said, Abram, I'm going to make you into a great nation, more innumerable than the stars, more innumerable than the sand. All people will be blessed because of you, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And then Jacob had 12 sons. 12 sons. He had daughters too, but he had 12 sons, and one of which, his name was Joseph. Joseph. We spent a little bit of time at the end of Genesis in our community groups. A great story. There's even been a Broadway play made about Joseph and his Technicolor robe, right? Well, Joseph was favored amongst his family. His father loved him. He was special. And at one point, he did place on him an ornate robe, a robe that was special. He loved him. He loved him. His brothers took issue with that. And at one point, one day, Joshua, revealed this idea or this ability that he had from God, which we will see later. He could interpret dreams. He had this thing with dreams. Pretty interesting. And at one day, he told a dream to his brothers. And it really sounded like his brothers, it really sounded like he was going to say, hey, brothers, y'all are going to bow down to me. Don't know if he intended it to sound like that, but he was just talking about the dream that he had. They heard it, and they're like, we didn't like you before. Now we really don't like you. And one day they were out working, and Israel, or their father, sent him to them, and they saw him coming from a long way off, and one of the older brothers said, you know what? Let's just kill him. Yeah. I think that's our best option. Guys, just come together for a minute. I think this is what we're going to do. We got labor to do, right? We got to do that. We'll get back to that. But in the meantime, here comes bright-colored robe Joseph. Let's just kill him. One of the younger brothers was like, wait. Maybe not. Hey, just hold on. Pump the brakes just a little bit. Let's maybe just make Dad think he's dead. Let's drop him in a hole and put some blood on his robe and take it back to our dad and crush our dad in the process, which is pretty hilarious. It's not hilarious. It's terrible. But we're just going to make him think he's dead, and we'll sell him off. They sold him into slavery, right? One brother really intended to go back and get him out of the pit later, but he gets back and he's gone, and he's like heartbroken and destroyed. But anyway, at some point, like Joseph, he had been sold. And then he got sold again. And he ended up being a servant in the house of a guy who lived in Egypt. So the first people that bought him, they were like, he looks like he'll do some pretty good. We could probably make some money off of him, turn a quick dime, sell him to someone in Egypt, and they put him in the house. And as soon as he got in the house, because God had given him favor still, the man of the house looked at him and was like, you're good. You're really good. I'm going to give you a little responsibility. So he took that responsibility. He did well. I'm going to give you a little more responsibility. He took that responsibility, did well. At some point, he rose himself up to be over the house. He was the chief servant in this house over all the things. All the things. Dropped in a hole, acted like he was dead, sold as a slave, resold as a slave, and now he had risen to the top servant in the house in Egypt. And then, as it happens, favored by God, Potiphar, who owned the house, his wife looked at him and said, you know what? I like you. I'm going to make you an offer. Not a real good offer. And Joseph was like, no, hard pass. Hard pass. And she tried again. And then this time she grabbed his robe and tore off a section as he was running away. And then she came up with this grand story. This servant in our house, he tried to take advantage of me. So what did Potiphar do? Potiphar had no choice. Threw him in prison. Threw him in prison. And then Joseph lands in prison. All of this started about the time that he was 17. Okay, and so he's had some time now. And so now he's in prison. And for some reason, God shows him favor in prison. And the guy that was over the prison, not one of the prisoners, but one of the paid employees, he takes a liking to Joseph. And he says, look, Joseph, I want you to be over all the prisoners. I want you to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. I'm going to put you in charge of all of them. You're not me, but you speak for me. So I'm going to place you in charge of all the prisoners. And then at some point, this dream issue came back. There were a few prisoners that had a dream. And Joseph, being gifted, touched, favored by God, he said, I think I can tell you what those dreams mean. And he did. They were amazed. And gradually it kind of worked its way up the ladder until Pharaoh was having dreams. Pharaoh, not in the prison, well outside of the prison, the guy over all of Egypt. And they sinned for Joseph. Joseph, teenage boy, loved by his dad, hated by his brothers, sold into slavery, dropped in a hole, his death was faked. He ended up in prison, risen to the top, and now Pharaoh is like, hey, I've had these dreams. Can you tell me what they mean? He's like, well, yeah, I think I can tell you what they mean. Long story short, it looked like Israel, in about 7 years, was going to enter into a great time of famine. As a matter of fact, not Israel, but Egypt. Egypt was going to enter into a great famine, but they had time to prepare. And Joseph, able to interpret the dreams, was able to prep Pharaoh and say, look, 7 years' time, it's going to be really rough. But in the meantime, we can store up, we can collect, we can build up and fill our silos with grain so that when that time comes, it doesn't matter what our neighbors experience, but we're going to be okay. And bit by bit, his favor with Pharaoh, just like his favor with God, grew. And then eventually, there was Pharaoh, and then there was Joseph. And Joseph, a Hebrew boy, no longer a boy, favored by God, was over all of Egypt. Over all of Egypt. Unbeknownst to him, his family back in Canaan, man, that famine was striking. It was landing. And his family, who thought he was dead, hadn't thought of him in decades. Their dad, who was still alive, said, boys, pack some bags, take some goods, take some money, go to Egypt, buy some grain. And we can't go into this whole entire story. There was a little cat and mouse stuff that went along, and it was humorous at times, but also it was heartbreaking at times. But long story short, the way it ends, they didn't recognize their brother, but at one point, Joseph couldn't take it anymore, and he was like, I'm Joseph. I'm your brother, and I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of you. And at the end of Genesis, chapter 50, starting in verse 20, it says this. It says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Then verse 22, so Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation, the children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, who were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put into a coffin in Egypt. The story of Genesis is not just about that God made us from nothing, made us in his image, created something that was good, and we broke it by sin, and then he offered redemption that began even there but would play out. But it was also about a God being a God of promise. Of promise. We would call it in biblical terms covenant, which is an agreement that the faithfulness of one party is not based upon the faithfulness of another party, and the faithfulness of a covenant is based on the faithfulness of God that does not waver. And so then we find ourselves in the book of Exodus. Now, originally in the Hebrew text, there was no division between Genesis and Exodus. It would just keep going. But around the time that the Pentateuch, being first five books of the Bible, when they're divided, Exodus was like a new chapter mark or a new beginning. And so we find ourselves, Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. It says, these are the names of the son of Israel, or Jacob, who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. This number, it says 70. Depending on how we do math, there's probably another 5 more talking about Joseph and them already being there. So 70 to 75 people landed in a place called Egypt from a place called Canaan, because what people intended for harm and evil, God intended for good. 70 to 75 people. 70 to 75 people. Less than what we have in here today, but 70 to 75 people. They landed in a place called Egypt that was not their own, because God had a covenant. God told Abraham, he said, I will make you a great, great people. The world will be blessed through you, and it'll be like the stars in the sky, the sands on the seashore, and I will do it. I will do it. And so we find ourselves in this place called Egypt, and we find all of the original 75 that had been there, they have now passed. And roughly between verse 7 and verse 8, where we're going to pick up, depending on our estimations, 175 to 300 years. I kind of lean more towards the 300 years. I lean more towards the longer view, because they dwelt in Egypt for 430 years before the law was given. And I think that started when the family transplanted there. But there's a lot of lineages and things we can do to calculate that. Exodus was written around 1400s. Remember, BC goes backwards, okay? So don't be too confused. Exodus was written sometime in the 1400s. Moses was born, who we will talk about next week, in 1526 BC. Moses is attributed to writing the book of Exodus, actually the whole entire Pentateuch. And then if we go back, even though it's a bigger number, Abraham was called in 2160. Okay, so from 2160 to 1526. This is kind of the time frame that we're looking at. From Abraham's call to when Moses was born. And Moses didn't go into service to God until he was around 80. Okay, so there's a lot of math there. A lot of math there. And probably like I said, from the end of chapter 7 to the verse 8 that we're about to read, 175 to 300 some odd years had passed. Okay? But again, to repeat, 75 people. 75 people. And here's what we find. Here's what we find. We're going to read verses 8 through 14 first. It says, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel, first time that someone else had called them a people or a persons or a group bigger than just like a family. Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built Pharaoh's store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel, so they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all the kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. And so we push forward 175 to 300 years. Again, I lean more towards the 300 years. We push forward to there. New king, new Pharaoh. And he didn't know Joseph. He didn't know that Joseph started as just a house servant that grew up through the ranks and found himself over the house until someone told a lie and he landed in prison. He didn't know that the guy over the prison looked at him and said, man, you're a good kid. Would you like to help me rule over the prisoners? And then he interprets dreams. And he didn't know that he interpreted dreams that kept Egypt from starving to death. He knew nothing about him. Much time had passed, and there were 75 people that transplanted from one place to this place. And at this point, the new king looks out, and what used to be 75, he looks at them and he was like, they are so many, they threaten our very existence. He said, look at all of them. They are everywhere. And I say that because, again, God is a God of covenant. God is a God of faithfulness. God is a God of promise. And what did he tell Abraham? I will make you a great people, and you will be innumerable, and the world will be blessed through you. God is a God of covenant. And so at this point, even now, from 75 people, we see it taking shape. We see it beginning. And the ball is rolling fast. And Pharaoh sees it, the new king sees it, and he says, okay, here's our first option. Here's my first choice. We're going to kill them with labor. And that was his intent. That was his intent. His intent wasn't just to make life hard, because there was a numbers problem, and he wanted to correct the numbers problem. So what he said is like, look, we're going to use them to death. That's what we're going to do. We're going to use them up. He's going to build some store cities for us. We're going to put them to work. We are going to ruthlessly make them work. And even that English translation of ruthlessly, that literally means to break into pieces and crush. The Hebrew word there, ruthlessly make. Break into pieces and crush. He was like, we're going to break them into pieces. We're going to crush them with labor. That's our plan. Because, hey, if war breaks out, the chances are they're going to join our enemy that's attacking us, and we're done. We cannot possibly withstand this people, not a family anymore, but a people of Israel. We can't take them. He said, so we're going to set taskmasters. That's a nice way of saying we're going to put slave masters over them. We're going to treat them, make them slaves in this place that they have dwelt for several some odd years, and now we're just going to kill them with labor. We're going to kill them with labor. By the way, this has happened for generations and generations all throughout Earth's history. If someone wants to eradicate people, there's a good chance they're like, well, you know what? We don't value them very much, and we need to get things done. So let's just use them until they die. Use them until they die. It's one of the reasons we support Set Free Alliance, by the way. I don't know if Andrew's in here. Just a quick little plug. Set Free Alliance goes and rescues kids in India who the exact same thing is happening to right now. So anyway, sorry, side note. Talk to Andrew if you want to support Set Free. And so he decided, we're going to kill them with labor. But what was the result? The result was what? Even though they tried, all the more that they tried, it said they multiplied all the same. They multiplied all the same. That was his first attempt. Second attempt we start to see in verse 15. It says, then the king of Egypt says to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Siphrah, the other was Puah. He said, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it's a daughter, you shall let her live. We'll pause right there. A couple ways to read this. Hebrew midwives, we can use Hebrew as an identifier of their culture, or we can use Hebrew to describe who they were working for. one way or the other. They were either Hebrew by birth and they were midwives to the Hebrew women, or they were Egyptian by birth and they were assigned to the Hebrew women. We don't really know, okay? Either way, what we do know, we kind of lean towards the fact that they're most likely Hebrew because their names are of Hebrew descent. But either way, if they were Egyptians and they were prescribed to go into the Hebrew women, man, that was more proof of like fruitful and multiply. And now it was multiplying beyond just the lineage of Israel. And so that's pretty impressive. But either way, like if they're Hebrew women that are going in to serve Hebrew women in the midwife fashion, here's the first thing that we know about them. It says in verse 17, but the midwives feared God. The midwives feared God. So either possibility right now. If they're Egyptian and they're serving the Hebrew women, it's incredible. It's incredible that Egyptians who worshipped all kinds of other gods, not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when told by their king who they were supposed to worship, that we fear God more than we fear you, that would be impressive. That would be impressive. Equally as impressive on this hand, if they're Hebrew women serving Hebrew women in the midst of everything that they're experiencing, in the midst of all of this, like being crushed literally with labor, being killed to death by the things that were being asked to do, and when a king who's offering them a chance at hope asks them to do something and they still say, I fear God more than I fear you, equally as impressive. Either way, whether they're Hebrew, whether they're Egyptian, the central thing is their king told them to do something, and their response is, we fear God more than we fear you. We worship him, we don't worship you. And so the way that this played out, it says, but the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? And let the male children live. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. Now, here's a little moral quandary, all right? Is this a lie? Possible. Okay? Is it being rewarded that they lied? No. But is it a lie? Possibly. If we go back to Abram and Sarah, Abraham, he lied twice, right? And it's not excusing it. It's not giving liberty. It's not giving license to lie. But either way, moral quandary. It's a lie. But here's the reason it's a moral quandary. It says, I'm going to reread, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. End quote. So God dealt well with the midwives. He didn't deal well with them whether or not there was a lie. He dealt well with them because they feared him and they chose to honor his law other than the law that broke his law that the king was issuing. God didn't desire that these babies be killed, not because they were Israel, but because they were babies in this murder. And even now, that moral code already exists. Even before the Ten Commandments had been passed down, the moral fabric of God in which we were created in still exists right here. And so the reason that God honored them is they were not willing to transgress the heart law of God in favor of the king's law who wanted to kill. And it said, and they were rewarded by God. Now, how do I deal with the lie? I don't know. I read several people, they're like, well, it's the intent behind it. I'm not going to whitewash it like that, okay? Maybe, even some people said, well, maybe they were actually telling the truth. Maybe in this moment, the way in which they were fruitful and they multiplied, God made the Hebrew women incredibly vigorous. And before the midwives knocked. My wife and I, we've watched Call the Midwife. I think it's very similar, right? Before they knocked. You know, maybe they're just like, oh, I already hear a baby in there. Maybe that's the case. Either way, their heart declared, I will not violate God's law no matter what you tell me because you're telling me to break it. And so they feared God. They worshiped God. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. A lot of times someone would serve as a midwife because they didn't have children of their own to take care of, and so this was their place. If they had their own children, they couldn't go and do all of these things. And so maybe these women were considered barren. But now, one way in which God honored them is he said, I'm going to give you family too. And the people of Israel, they multiplied. So we've seen 2 instances already in which Pharaoh said, look, we're going to wipe them out. We're going to crush them with labor. We're going to break them into pieces, literally, and make them build things for us. And what was the response? They just multiplied all the same. And then Pharaoh's like, I've got a great idea. Great idea. It's going to come in the form of midwives, and they're just going to kill every son that's born. Midwives honored God more than they honored Pharaoh. They wouldn't do it. And it says the people grew and grew and multiplied. 2 times already. Then the third shows up in just one verse, in verse 22. And then it says, then Pharaoh commanded all his people. He said, okay, if it didn't work with midwives, if it didn't work with them who were dealing with a small section, he's like, I'm going to tell all the people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. You got to come back next week to see what happens. But that's how chapter 1 ends. He told all people, if you see a Hebrew baby boy, toss him in the river. A Hebrew baby, toss him in the river. Like, I don't know if I can even try to put myself in that place to where that's the edict. You know, like I can't fathom that, especially a people that, here's the difficult part, like a people that are known by God, that are God's people, they're living in the midst of this, and they find themselves in a place to where the king that is over the land in which they live currently is saying, if you have a son, he dies. It's crazy. As we read through the book of Exodus, there are going to be a lot of questions. Reading through the book of Exodus as new covenant people, because we're new covenant people, and what that means is there's been a new covenant to see the old covenants fulfilled, and the new covenant now supersedes those old covenants. And what the new covenant says is that all of those laws that you could not live out perfectly, God will come and live them out in your place through Jesus. He will come fulfill the law in its entirety because you are incapable. I am incapable. We are broken, marred by sin to such a degree that perfection is not in my DNA. And so the new deal is God will come in our place. Then the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, John chapter 1. And then he lived a perfect life. He never transgressed in the way that we battle every single day, even though he was tempted beyond our comprehension. The new covenant says, now, here's the deal. You trust in me. You trust in me alone, and I will make you right because you couldn't make yourself right. Trust in Jesus. Faith in Jesus. New covenant. And so when we read Exodus, we're going to begin to be, just to experience the old covenant, the old ways, the way in which God put all of these things in motion that would ultimately point all of these people to look forward to what they so desperately needed in the Messiah, Jesus. So in the meantime, we have to ask good questions when we walk through the book of Exodus. We have to ask, starting, what did this mean to them? That's where we start. What did this mean to them? As a people with a covenant with God, covenant relationship, dependent upon the faithfulness of God and not theirs, what did it mean to them? The second question to that is, what does it mean to me now? What does it mean to me now? Because the Old Testament still has great value. I know there was a huge movement from a very popular evangelical pastor a few years ago, and I think his comment was blown way out of proportion, but he said we need to unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament and stop leaning there. I think that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. I don't know if y'all picked up on that one, but that's a great movie quote right there from the Christmas season. But like that's absurd. Because what we need to know about Messiah and how desperately we needed him, man, so much of that comes from the Old Testament. How God started, how God wrote his story, how God was being faithful even though we were not. All of those things are intrinsic to what it means for me to lay my life at the feet of a faithful God. I need to know those things. And as we walk through the book of Exodus, we ask, what does it mean to them? What does it mean for me now? And then thirdly, we just want to look at it well in the big picture and say, what does it mean for eternity? What does it mean for them? What does it mean for me now? But what does it mean in the scope of eternity? And how do we handle those things? I think to answer those first two questions here in this text, what does it mean for them now in this place, in their time? I I think there's three things that we can observe. Three things that we can observe. The first, and we've already said it, God's promise, God's covenant with Abraham is being fulfilled as we read, as they lived. God's promise and God's covenant to Abraham is being fulfilled right here, right now. Be fruitful, multiply. That was a command given before Abraham, but it was expected to be lived out in Abraham in the form of a people unto God. Israel, those people. And we're watching it, regardless of what Pharaoh is trying to do. His three best efforts right here in one chapter. It says, and they multiplied. And before that, they had already multiplied greatly to the point that Pharaoh looked at them and he was like, they are a threat to our national security. I mean, that's basically what he's saying. He's like, if war breaks out, we're toast. We're done. We got to deal with them. We got to deal shrewdly with them. We're going to crush them. We're going to break them into pieces and make them do stuff for us at the same time. Problem solved. Gets to the end of it, problem not solved. They keep growing. What's going on? What's in the water? Stop drinking from the Nile. And then, he talks to the midwives. He's like, look, when a baby boy's born, here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut it off before it starts. We're going to make sure they can't have any more children. Their line dies here. And they're like, well, Pharaoh, those Egyptian women, they are strong, vigorous. They have those babies before we even knock. And they multiplied. So that covenant that God had made through Abram to Abraham, and Sarah, and Isaac, and Jacob, it was being fulfilled even now. It was being fulfilled. It hadn't stopped. It wasn't over, but it was being fulfilled. From 75 to a number so big that a king looks at them with dread. Can't count them. And wait until we get to the time in which they actually leave. Because I hate to give it away, but Exodus literally means like to get out or the leaving. And when they leave, the numbers start to come up. And guess what? They are wild. I hate to spoil it for you, but it's crazy. The second thing, and I think this needs to be heard for them, and it will translate to us. Why were they in Egypt? Why were they in Egypt? They were in Egypt because God displayed grace. You're like, wait, hold on. The Pharaoh's trying to kill them. He is. He's trying to wipe them out. He is. He's trying to kill their firstborn. He is. But they're there because of grace. They're there because of God's faithfulness. And you're like, they're in a terrible place. They are in a pretty terrible place right now. But it hadn't been terrible. It had been pretty good. As a matter of fact, if they had not been there, they would have died in Canaan. They would have starved to death. They would have starved to death. And God's covenant, God's agreement, God's deal based on his faithfulness and not theirs, it would have been over. And we wouldn't be able to say that God's faithful. But his faithfulness and his grace put them there. Put them there. They're there because of grace. No Egypt, no Israel. No Egypt, no Israel. I do think it's pretty interesting, since we just left the Christmas season, when Jesus needed to flee because they were trying to kill all the firstborn sons, where did they go? They went to Egypt. I love that. Dude, that gives me goosebumps. Like, that's pretty impressive. But either way, right now, right here, they're in Egypt because God had a plan, and God showed them grace. The third thing I think is true for them, putting it lightly, their circumstances, they were difficult. Just put it lightly. Difficult circumstances. But those difficult circumstances do not remove three things. They don't remove God's presence, they don't remove God's plan, and it does not remove their ability to be faithful. It doesn't remove God's presence, it doesn't remove God's plan, and it doesn't remove their ability to be faithful. And that's the reason that if I hold these midwives up in this hand, and they are Hebrew midwives to Hebrew women, and in the midst of all of this, they choose to fear God over Pharaoh, whew, that's something. Because everything around them was saying, submit or you die. And they said, no. No. Their circumstance was hard. And they were being crushed. Or at least they were trying. They were trying to kill their firstborn sons, and every son born, as a matter of fact. But God was still with them. His plan was still completely active, and they were still able to be faithful in the midst of it. That's what it meant for them. For you and me, I think it's pretty similar. But I think the thing that needs to be said is that our easiest option from a heart posture is when things get hard and difficult. And I can promise you, none of us have experienced this level of difficulty. Okay? We haven't. And so for me to even compare my plight to theirs in this moment, I feel a bit guilty. Okay? Because, again, no one's trying to crush us with labor and kill us and wipe us off the map right now. Now, there are brothers and sisters in the world right now that call the name of Jesus as their Lord, and it's happening to them, but it's not happening for us here. Okay? But for us, even in our difficulty, when things get hard and we look at a track record with God in which we say, God, I've been faithful, I've been determined to yield myself to you, I have applied your word to my life, I have tried to make as much room for the Holy Spirit to have rule over my life as possible, I read your word daily, I pray to you, maybe I even started fasting last week, and then difficult times come, the very first thing that we say is, what have I done wrong? Doesn't mean we've done anything wrong. Sometimes in our following and yielding to God, there will be difficult days. There will be difficult days, and the same thing is true. It does not remove God's presence, it does not change God's plan, and it does not negate our ability to continue to be faithful. As a matter of fact, I think it amplifies our ability to be faithful sometimes. I think it's kind of a well-known Christian adage that the most fertile places in our environment are very often the valleys. No one wants to be there, but it's where a large majority of growth occurs because everything washes down from a geological standpoint. The water washes down, the nutrients wash down, the soil washes down, and the bottom of those valleys, the place that we don't want to be, is often where the most fruit is found. It doesn't negate God's presence. It doesn't change his plan, and it doesn't reduce our ability to be faithful. As a matter of fact, it might amplify it. Just when things are difficult. Sometimes this is very easy to see in hindsight when we're out of the valley, right? When we're out of the valley, we've made it to the mountaintop, the sun has crested over, to keep the metaphor going, we feel the warmth of it, we're like, finally, I am out of there. And then we kind of turn and we look back. And we're like, man, God, you did so much. You did so much. While I was struggling to climb out, when the days were terrible, you were faithful. Your plan was clear. And my only option was just to lean into you more. Very often, hindsight, man, we see so well. And so it's so vastly important for us before those days come. Maybe you're on mountaintops right now. Maybe you've got the sun in your face. The wind is just right. You just have to wear a light parka, not even a heavy coat. Everything's dandy. Maybe that's you right now. For you right now, you need to hear, a valley will come. A valley will come. And in that valley, it doesn't mean that God has forgotten about you. It doesn't mean that he has left you. It doesn't mean his plan for your life has changed. And it doesn't mean that you need to change your level of faithfulness. You just keep going. I obeyed you yesterday. I submitted to you yesterday when things are good. Today, things are not so good. I will obey you today. I will be faithful to you today. I will submit to you today until you choose to remove me from this valley. But while I am here, you are still here. Your plan is still the same, and my faithfulness will not waver. But we have to decide that before we land in the valley. Because if we wait until we get there, we're going to throw our hands up and say, God, why have you forsaken me? Why has your plan for me changed? What must I do to get out of here? Instead, if we acknowledge his presence, if we acknowledge his plan, if we continue in faithfulness, I truly believe he will do with us what he did with the people of Israel. We will multiply. And that's not name it and claim it, because I can't stand that. This is reality. God says, I will because you can't. Just keep being faithful. That's it. We're going to watch the people of Israel in Exodus struggle so hard. My word is vacillate. We're going to watch them vacillate, go back and forth, back and forth. But here's one thing that will never change. God sees his people. God saves his people. And that's Exodus. God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the truth of all of your word, old and new. God, we thank you for the covenants that you have made throughout the history with your people. We thank you for the glory that's revealed in that, your faithfulness that's revealed in that, and most importantly, the necessity of Messiah that's revealed in that. God, thank you that we're living there now. God, I thank you that Jesus is better. God, I thank you that regardless of our circumstance, you don't leave us, you don't forsake us. God, I thank you that your plan doesn't change when our world falls apart. And God, we thank you that your plan for us is just faithfulness. Just as you are faithful to us, you ask us to be faithful to you. There will be days in which we flub it up. Grace is still there. Repentance is still there. Jesus is still there. You're still there. And so, God, we thank you. May your Spirit that's also there, that's in us, just remind us frequently through your word, through himself, and through his people to just keep going, to continue to be faithful because you are. Thank you, God, that you see your children. Thank you, God, that you save your children. And thank you that you're faithful. And it's in your Son's name I pray. Amen.